freeze, Rika said. This computer can handle it, Rika said. Okay. Okay, I'm live on YouTube. Hello, people on YouTube. The drinking game link is live on YouTube. Let me get live on these other things. Let me get live so I can get really live on this. Wait, oh God.
Is it live? Okay. Y'all wanted a show? No.
Actually, I guess they can see you technically, but you'll be really small because I'm having the article. I have the article in large. Okay, I'm scared. Don't allow these like don't allow because the stream will include. Okay, don't allow. Okay, now this is going live, and then what? Oh my God! Almost one more hitch. So I'm going to start off with the general discussion of open quotients. Anytime someone asks a good question, I will take a drink of this mixed drink. If it's really good, I will pour myself a shot out this unopened bottle of vodka. Y'all can't see it right now because I'm not in the Hangouts, but so y'all know it's real. I will pour a shot for myself out this unopened vodka for these really good questions. I mean, y'all make me want to drink if you don't ask no good questions, but I'm trying to reward good behavior. Connect. Please, 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 please. And joining me on this stream is Nick Grigsby, who, oh shit. Is that okay?
You just doxed me?
Really?
Yeah, no.
Who is an open quotient queen. Will help me deliver this gospel to you house. Okay. Is that live? That's live on everything. I'm gonna try to live on Scinguistics. Okay. Close. Ooh, go inside the I'm going inside the server. Bitch. Go inside the server, voice text chat. I can see it. Okay, my audio's clipping really badly. Can y'all hear it?
I can hear you.
Okay, because you're hearing me through okay. How is this? Okay, let me get a little bit lower. Can people in YouTube land hear me? If you're having trouble hearing, ask for the link to the Discord, or if you're on one of these pages, the link to the Discord should be buried somewhere. Just like search Scinguistics Discord, and it's findable on Google. So search Scinguistics Discord and find your way in here.
I've had it for a long time. Nothing.
Oh my God. And you let me know how my audio is. Okay, so Nick, am I getting louder when I do this? Do I get louder?
I can't see you.
Wait, but I'm in the Hangouts call and I have that little square. You don't have the little square that shows what I'm doing?
Nope, I can only see the articles.
Whoa! I'm sorry. Okay. Well, you can't see me, but can you hear any difference when I do this?
Not a large difference.
Okay. Let me test it on Linux. Ooh, God, that's horrible. I'm sorry, y'all. Linux is ruining my life. Okay, it's not even changing the audio levels on the thing. So yeah, sometimes it'll do it, sometimes it won't. Okay, let me get it right, just in case it is the audio source after all. Okay, so thanks for joining. Ooh, for joining us on this edition of Drunk Voice Science Demystify. Help me come up with a good title for this shit in the comments. Ask good questions in the comments. So basically, what glottal open quotient is basically your vocal cords, hopefully y'all can see me, as they vibrate like this, also move like this. So the amount of time they spend apart while vibrating like this, so like in this position, this position, this position, this position, right before they touch again, all that time is factored into the open quotient, which is the opposite opposite of how much time they do spend together while vibrating. So like this is the open part of the quotient, or this is the open quotient. Now we're in the closed quotient. Now we're back into the open quotient. Now we're back into the closed quotient. So basically that's what that is. It's not one particular position of your vocal cords. So you can't say it's breathy because that's a general position of your vocal cords. Or you can't say it's like wide and open because that's a general position of your vocal cords. It's a trend in the pattern of the positions of your vocal cords. So the open phase of vibration is going to look very different depending on if you're M1 like this, aka chest voice, aka modal voice, aka learn what M1 is. And then you have a different kind of open phase when you're in this, aka M2, aka falsetto, aka head voice, aka low M2s. So those things intersect, but open quotient is its own overarching thing that can be applied anytime when there's phonation. So some people think of it as like, can I be really breathy? And that's a high open quotient. But that's like taking the open quotient of your grandmama's toilet, because there really is nothing to measure where open quotient is helpful if it's continuously open. And when you're breathing, even most of the times when you create a pitch when you breathe, like, you don't necessarily get full vocal cord glottal zippering where they move in and out like this. Let me check the comments real quick on this YouTube, see if y'all can see. Wow, okay. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you, Krampus. Thank you for recording the Discord audio. What the hell? I am really messed up right now. I'm getting... Oh, you know what? Okay. No, nothing is coming in out of desktop audio. So that's not it. Let me turn this up. Like, can y'all hear me? Is this all right? Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I should do a mic test like this. Is anybody hearing this tapping?
Yeah.
Okay. That was a tap. That sounded like a tap on the mic?
It's very light.
Wow.
Like it doesn't sound like it was on the mic.
Okay, where am I being picked up at then? Okay, maybe I'm being picked up by the computer. Either way, I turn myself up to critical levels. Tell me, oh, god damn it. Yeah, I'm using my phone mic for the Discord. So if audio is bad here, okay, it's not really clipping. Sorry, y'all, for the audio problems. This is what I wanted to test out. Okay, let me take this out and see if, does that fix it? Can y'all hear now? Okay, let me wait to see if people can hear. This is a mess. Okay, does a completely different mic fix this? Okay, can somebody listen on the video to figure it out? Somebody please listen on the video. Do me a solid. Let's see if people in Facebook land. Nobody in Facebook land. Nobody in Facebook land. Why is it side clicking? Side click. Okay, it's still bad. Okay, Krampus will be recording audio, so I will sync up we'll try to sync up the audio with the video later and do a re-upload of this. Sorry about it, y'all. Okay, there's no mic now. I'm just directly speaking into the, I don't know what is happening, but I've been sabotaged. Okay, so listen in the Discord if you can. If not, try to bear with it. I am sorry, I have no idea what is happening. Okay. Yeah, Lloyd just posted the link in the YouTube comments. If you can try, please go. And if you're on the browser, just go where you can get audio, right? Right. I just got a mic, and it was working so well. Now it's not. Okay, so let me not spend this entire thing lamenting this. Let me actually dive into some open quotient discussion. So, ask questions in the YouTube, in the Facebook, in the Discord, and I will intermittently check for good questions. And for every good question, I will drink a shot of this unopened vodka. You see the top not turning. And we're going to get litty. Okay. So, doing a really quick summary of the open quotient stuff we talked about before. It's a measure of how much time your vocal folds spend apart, not necessarily what position they're in. So the vocal cords are in dynamic motion during phonation. They're moving back and forth, like into each other and apart. And the more time they spend apart, the more time that is factored into the open quotient, the higher it gets. So open quotient is basically like a percent of the time that your vocal cords are apart while doing the zippering. Okay, so that said, we have 2 articles we're going to curate for y'all today, and I'll let Nick get to scrolling soon. We have one article on basically the impact of open quotient on the voice, and then we have another article on how to control it. I think we should start with the impact that it has first. So that's the article that we have open right now, so I guess we'll just go with that. A really quick auditory example. So this is me talking with I close quotient. My vocal cords are together more. It's creating this steely, dense, buzzy sound. But if I raise my open quotient, it's going to be a lot lighter and looser and more like Nick. Okay, so let's scroll down and dive into this. I guess get to the abstract, and we'll unpack the abstract.
Okay, this is it.
Yep, that's the abstract. Yep. Okay. So, chime in at any time, Nick. Like, I trust your judgment on this. Like, if you want to add anything, if you want to take charge of anything, by all means, go ahead. So, this article, basically, I'm summarizing stuff from reading this right now, looks at open quotient measurement as it pertains to singing voice. There's other articles that look at how it affects gender and how it, gender perception and how it affects vocal age perception and how age and gender in turn obviously have effects on this. But it's looking at it mostly in singers in different ranges. So the main variables that they're looking at here, I don't know if hopefully people can see my mouse, are vocal intensity, which I think is amplitude, so how loud it is, fundamental frequency, which is basically the pitch, and open quotient. Fundamental frequency and open quotient. Fundamental frequency you can just measure with any type of thing that can record sound. But the EGG, which is the electroglotographic signal, is basically a measurement or an approximation of the kind of measurement where they put like electrodes. Basically, they're measuring if electric current is running through your vocal cords. So if my vocal cords are like this, the current isn't going to run because it doesn't run through air. It's like if you touch the defibrillator pads together in an emergency room drama and you get sparks everywhere. So when you touch them together, you get those like sparks. Similarly for your vocal cords, in this context, you're going to get electric current, a very small one. You're not going to get sparks out your throat, but you're going to get a very small electric current when your vocal cords touch, when they have the electrodes on them. So that's basically how you can most objectively measure that. So I think they look at it in mechanism 1, mechanism 2, mechanism 1 being like chest, this, mechanism 2 being head voice, this, So yeah, that's pretty much it. Anything you wanted to add real quick, Nick?
No, I'm good.
Okay, let's start scrolling through. And I'll get, and feel free to cut me off at any time. This is the first one we've done. We're not really sure how we're structuring this. So I'll skim through this before. For those of you math heads, because open quotient and closed quotient, which is how much the vocal cords are together, are inverse measurements of each other. Let's see if we have any questions so far. Sabotage. Yeah, I am being sabotaged. Thank you. No questions. I'm open up Discord and there's still no questions. Yeah, I can't stand white audio either. Okay, so because of this sort of their opposites, you can sort of do one minus the other gives you the other. So it's like one minus the closed quotient gives you the open quotient. And you can also look at it in context with visualization. So basically use a stroboscope, which shines a light on your vocal cords, because to the human eye, you can't really see the vocal cords moving in and out in a discrete way. So you usually use a stroboscope, which if somebody requests it, we'll pull up a video. I'll pull up a video of the stroboscope. Okay, it's also been related to the amplitude difference. So for those of you that are acoustics nerds, the first and second harmonic, math with those, like basically taking the difference between them, has also been looked at as a way to measure what kind of glottal activity you're experiencing. If people have questions on that and what that looks like, we can show you like a real-time EGG. Or not real-time EGG, I wish. We can show you real-time spectrogram. So the other side of this article is basically showing what the populations that they tested on are. I don't have anything else to say about here, except it's kind of interesting that they have cited a study that actually looked at country singers for data for this, because usually the only singers that they look at are classical. So scroll down, next page. Unless you have something to add. Feel free to add something. Hey, Rebecca. If you can't hear, let me reply. Goddamn. If you can't hear, join on my Discord server. Let's see. Trying to generate a link. I'm a mess. Discord. Six. Oh, I don't have the quick link. Oh, goddamn. Sorry, no soldier left behind. Okay, now I am back to this curation. Do I close this? Actual high-speed video. Okay, so now we're reading through it more. No questions yet. I'm going to be very sober and very bored. So this is basically talking about trends in some of the measurements in previous data, that there's basically a difference in the open quotient that varies with fundamental frequency, which is the note that you're hitting, and varies by gender, but right now they're looking at, and also varies by mechanism. And there's a good summary of the mechanisms paper if you look down this paragraph that's on the screen right now. But they're looking at it in terms of pitch, in terms of mechanism, and in terms of gender. And I think it also can be broken down like stylistically. You can choose to have different open and closed quotients, but all these things also correlate with different open and closed quotients. Okay. So what they're summarizing what they're going to look at and how they're going to look at it, and that takes us to the material and method. Usually materials and methods, but okay. So that basically just outlines the kind of recording tools that they look at, that they use, electroglottographic signal, and that they have something to record sound pressure level for the intensity that we talked about before, and they probably look at amplitude harmonics and stuff. So scroll down a little bit, let's look at these subjects. Okay, thank you, Nick. And add anything at any time, please, God. Save me, I'm floundering. 18 trained singers, and it gives the breakdown of their fox. What we're going to expect from the data is that, and let's see if there's any good questions in the comments. Oh my God. No questions, just potato comments, because nobody wants to learn about quotients. Okay, no comments or questions there either that are helpful. Yes, then ask questions when you're confused, because no one's gonna fully understand questions quotients after this. And I ain't helping y'all. This is the last. This is it. After this video, everyone will understand quotients, right? Because nobody has any questions. They talk about the figures that we'll look at later, and they talk about the kinds of passages that they're going to have these singers use and speakers use to demonstrate different quotient values. The chart down here just looks at the ranges in, I guess, years of training of these singers that are demonstrating the different notes for quotient analysis. So there's like these kind of paired off, if you can see my mouse cursor, there are these paired off measurements where one on this side is M1 and one is M2. As you can see, most of these, the M1 will be lower than the M2 overall. And this gives like their range in M1 and M2, so we can really separate out what kinds of mechanisms are giving us what kind of open quotient behavior. So thanks. Keep scrolling down. Let me know if you have anything to add. Okay. Okay. I think this is. Yeah, you can scroll down a little bit more. This is basically giving the kinds of passages that they sung, which they talk about the vowels and the notes, and y'all know or should know how I feel about vowels. Okay, so here's some of the preliminary data you saw with those charts. I'd say I'd stay here for a little bit. Okay, so. Wait, give me 2 seconds. Y'all, if y'all want something to drink before you go, feel free to kill it. Miles. If you want something to drink before you go, feel free to kill it. If you want some of the drink before you go, feel free to kill it. Yeah, you too as well, Shema.
Oh, okay.
Y'all, but I was like, I kept trying to say it over and over. Okay. So here are some of the results of the studies on the quotients. There's some interesting breakdowns in this study. If people ask and want to go over the breakdowns for specific fach, we can talk about that a little bit more. But right now I'm just going to give you like an overall tour of it because I'm upset about this audio. And I'm upset and I want to drink, but nobody's going to ask a single question. Ooh, is this even a question for me? Okay, that wasn't a question, Zeddy. If you want me to talk about it, ask in the question form. Thank you. Your other question is not breathiness. Hopefully we have the beginning where I talked about that saved. Knowing my life, we probably don't, but I'll go over that again. CT1, CT. Oh no, that's trolling. Never mind. Okay, nobody has a question, so everybody's gonna be confused and DM me. I see. That's how we're gonna do this.
Open quotient is related to though, isn't it?
Yes, at its extremes, of course, open quotient will lead to more breathiness. The more your vocal folds are apart, the more air can escape. But, like, M2 has a predominantly higher open quotient than M1. So we can use that in and of itself to debunk the notion that they are inextricably linked. So this sound is probably going to have a higher open quotient than this sound, even though the sound on the bottom is breathier. Like I heard breathy in this, but I don't hear breathy in this. But the top one is going to be more likely, that top sound is going to be more likely to have a higher open quotient. So the heart of open quotient is not breathiness, but the side effect of open quotient can be some breathiness. And I think also the fact that a lot of these singers are classically trained is going to preclude the presence of exaggerated breathiness. So even as their open quotients increase, they're not really going to change breathiness drastically, because that's not how they sing. So, I'm sorry. Who is like actually texting me now? No, you missed your chance, Ed.
No, can you call my phone?
Oh, can I call your phone?
I'll call your phone.
Yeah. How about the president? Is that live streaming? Okay. 1 second. Oh, and this isn't charging. That's lovely. Let me fix this. Okay, there we go. Sorry for those of you in Discord that are getting like my phone buzzing. People only love me when I'm in live streams and want to call me then. I promise I don't get calls in real life. So as you can see here, another thing that open quotient isn't related to is breathiness. So, besides breathiness, it's vowels. So you can see A, E, and U. So these vowels are IPA vowels. So it's like A, and U. These vowels don't show hella variance in quotient for vowels between the vowels. So it's like 0.64 almost across the board for A, and U. The intensity might change a little bit, but even that doesn't change drastically. But where it does change is then we look at M1 and M2. There's a there's a drastic increase in open quotient as you go from M1 to M2. So let's scroll down to the next page a little bit. Let's keep those graphics up for a second, so I just explain those real quick. Let me look at the voice text chat and see if there's no questions. Oh, you tagged questions? Okay. Oh, wait. Are people pinning questions? Okay. Oh God. I don't know what tagging questions means. Oh, wait. How are questions? I am sorry. Are people asking them on YouTube? Okay. Okay. Now I'm seeing questions. Sorry. So let me ask the.
To get the shot glass.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And I'm cracking open. Let me show you that I'm cracking open. There's new vodka. Look at that. Torn off. Okay. So, let me get on it. Thank you for reminding me. Oh, you did? But I'm not seeing like nothing. Oh, okay. Oh. Here's a forced question. I'm going to skip that. Is it possible to be loud with lots of open quotients? Yes, it is, because loudness is often determined by subglottal pressure, how much air is pumping into the glottis. So you can have it pumping while your vocal cords are more spread out, and I can still be loud with a higher open quotient, as opposed to being quiet with a higher closed quotient. So it's still possible to be loud, and that's a challenge that a lot of trans people have to get over, because I've talked about that a fair amount on the server before. I will take a little babby shot for that one. Down the hatch. That burns. Actually, that's not that bad, actually. For cheap-ass vodka. Okay, I don't count that as a question, the breathiness thing. Okay. Thank you, Krampus. You're the best. Okay. Using less weight as you go out. You think all these things are abstract attempts to... Yeah, some of that is increasing open quotient and also allowing the mechanism to change. Costco vodka? Ooh, good to know. Okay. I thought you were just like asking a question because nobody else was asking a question. Well, I'm not going to drink for that. What do we know about open and closed quotient physiologically, not phenomenologically, and how can that be applied to modifying those? The second paper will be on that. We know about the muscles controlling it. You were mod, and you should have known that, so I'll take a sip of my mixed drink for that.
Maybe they're just asking because it's like a pity question.
Maybe, wait, sorry, say it again, Nick?
Maybe it's just pity questions.
Yeah, it's probably just pity questions. Yeah, I'm not going to drink for pity questions. I'll just drink after that. Okay. So, this is showing just some of the trends in M1 and M2, how you get different kinds of open quotient values in them. As you see, the M1 and M2 have a pretty decisive gap, if you can see my thing, and open quotients between them. And M1, actually, as you come down out of this glissando, this is a glissando, it's like a ooh. So as I switch back down into M1 at first, sometimes in the higher notes in M1, you can get a spike in open quotient, or in closed quotient or open quotient, because either it's really light at the top, and eventually we'll talk about how sometimes you can be belting at the top. Okay, so let's scroll down a little bit more, see if anybody asks any real question. Okay, nobody has any real questions. Oh, actually, no, sorry, Ian does. Let me drink for these questions, maybe. Okay, what's the application of knowing more about open and closed quotient? How can I incorporate that into practice? Not the greatest question, because I talked about that in the beginning, so make sure when this is uploaded, you watch the beginning. So I'll sip some of mixed drink for that. Or not, because it's stupid ice cube. I'm sipping on a cherry blossom citrus slush. I made it myself. Oh, ooh, y'all can only hear me sipping. Y'all can't see me sipping. There, I sipped. Okay, so closed quotient and open quotient can be incorporated into figuring out your mix, figuring out your vocal weight, figuring out your vocal gender presentation, figuring out your vocal age presentation. All these factors that I talked about, like you can tell whether or not you're in M1 or M2 sometimes. You can look at how it varies on different pitches, and to look at how that can help you predict the qualities of these pitches. So it's like if I'm going higher, I know M1 will tend to thin out, and as I get higher, I might get a higher open quotient. If I know I want to have a heavy voice throughout my range, for instance, this is one of many applications, you can actively troubleshoot that as an area, and I've worked with Krampus, who's one of the moderators of this discussion on this kind of thing, is as you drag up through your range, you can get a sort of lightning that you can counteract by intentionally dragging a lot of weight up the higher closed quotient from the lower notes to counteract the higher open quotient from the higher notes. So that is the answer to that question. Is there any relationship between growliness and quotient? Growliness tends to be like false-fold behaviors, so like, and there's not an inherent relationship between the false fold or any other vibrating body in the vocal tract and what the actual vocal cords are doing. Open and closed quotient apply to vocal cords. Okay, I will take a part of this shot for that. Okay, back to another question. Zeddy asked, so understanding that open quotient is how longer or shorter your folds stay open, how would you control that? The second article is a muscles article, and we're going to talk more about what controlling that is like. Mia asks, the exercises of singing a relatively comfortable high note and dragging down to find open quotient and vice versa to close quotient, the only good practice for finding these things. Nick actually has a drill that he coined himself to help with quotient as well. Basically, she's asking whether or not there are other ways to work on quotient besides the standard dragging up for a higher closed quotient and dragging down for a higher open quotient. Nick, you want to go over your drill?
Sure. So something that what you can do is kind of like I guess something of a like isolated exploration of the spectrum of quotient is to go from a breathy sound in your voice to a more closed, creaky sound. And you can go backwards as well. So, like if you were to play a recording of somebody retching and then play it in rewind, that's kind of what it would sound like. So if you you can do it on the same note, which is what I like about it versus the sliding up and down pitch range. But going of course, you'll get into press phonation as you get closer and closer to 100% quotient. But you go. You'll that'll kind of help you get more what it feels like to gauge your open quotient and isolation.
Okay, good stuff. I'm starting to feel that booze. Yeah, let me try that once just to make sure if your audience is coming through that people have like an example that they can clearly hear. So, regular to retch is inclusive closed quotient, right?
Yeah. Well, it's it can also just be to creak. It doesn't. I like to go until I get to a full stop.
Yeah.
But you can go towards creak.
Okay, so I'm gonna go like gag me with the spoon, retch and creak at the same time. So, or retchy creak. So, this is a pretty high open quotient. Does that count?
You kind of like skipped out on everything in the middle.
I'm trying to get abbreviated for time, and I'm starting to get drunk. Okay. Give me some mercy. So, is that good enough for the boys and girls?
Yeah.
Gag me with the spoon. Okay, and now going in reverse. Is that a good reversal example?
Yeah, that sounded fine.
Okay, so this article, back to reading this article, let's see if there's any questions on any of that. Hopefully you got that question in, the answer to your question. That question earned a drink. I don't know how to fix the sound at all. I'm sorry. Y'all gonna have to deal. So, a high enough constriction of the false folds, that acts like an SOVT. Not on topic, but I will answer it without drinking. So, a high enough constriction of the false folds could act sort of like a CVT if the false folds and the true folds activity weren't so coupled. And most people, they don't need to be coupled. But when people squeeze with their false folds to make this kind of sound, they'll also tend to compress the true folds as well. So until they know that difference, it doesn't act as an SOVT. An SOVT, or it doesn't act as a helpful SOVT. So SOVT is a semi-occluded vocal tract exercise. It's the sort of like the gold standard of vocal warm-up exercises. So have you ever seen like High School Musical with the like the lip trill? That's a kind of semi-occluded vocal tract exercise because you're semi-occluding or closing off your vocal tract with your lips. You're not fully occluding it because your lips are bursting open and shut. Which lips? With the pulse of air that you should be exuding, or not the pulse, the stream of air that you should be exuding from your glottis. So if you are having good glottal mechanics and putting out air like you should be, or a base amount of air in order to fight off tension, you should be getting that kind of exercise happening with your vocal cords, but that might not happen with false folds. Okay. So let's look at these interesting things for the countertenor. The only thing I'll really talk about here, because nobody seems to want to know, is as the pitch increases, the open quotient tends to decrease. So what that could mean is that you're straining in M2. So as I get higher, my open quotient might increase, which often leads to a range block. So if I go like that tends to shut off my range more than if I go like. So if I go continue, I switch to M3. But if you go continually up without clamping off, your range won't tend to climax as much. But as you get to your limit, people tend to increase their close quotient. So you want to look for that as a telltale sign that your high notes might be getting blocked off. And plug. We are doing a module soon on how to get over your range breaks or blocks in M2. So vote for the time, or else you do not get to complain when it's offered at a time that doesn't work for your little piddly ass time zone. So show up and vote for the stuff to get a M2 block module in your time zone. Learn how to get higher head voice notes. Pluggity plug. Anything to add with the countertenor open quotient stuff? Nick?
Nah.
Okay, scroll down. Give me some of that sweet scroll down. So, I'll probably leave this alone for now. Baritones. Oh, baritones. By the way, there is a drinking game for this. If y'all want to drink along, ask one of the mods for the list of buzzwords. Please post that in the voice text chat. So I'm not going to go over the intricate okay, never mind. That's not really. I'll do it that later. Let's see if there's any questions on YouTube. Nope. Okay. So, vocal intensity and fundamental frequency correlations. This is basically just means how loud and strong your voice sounds. As you go throughout range. The sentence that Nick highlighted. If you want to, do you want to speak to that sentence, or you want me to say something?
Oh no, I was just highlighting it because you were talking about it.
Yeah. So there is some correlation between intensity as you go up. There are certain range pockets where intensity will increase. I don't think that necessarily means, as we talked about with Bingo's question, that you need an increase in close quotient. I think that just means that you have an increase in intensity, which may result in a decrease in close quotient, but it's mainly an increase in intensity as you go up to like higher notes. So a lot of people experience like, oh, I can't hit this high note quietly. They're basically saying that kind of thing exists. Like as people go up to high notes and they're like, that kind of thing can happen to some people. Okay, slide down.
You know, you can actually use these ink blots to diagnose your own mental illness.
So it basically looks at the vowels and the intensity on each one of them. Vowels will affect intensity to a certain degree, but notice how close the lines can get, like on the B4, which I think is like baritone number 4. Honestly, it could be baritone number 4000. They're all the same. Rubbish. So I'll keep scrolling down. So you can see that the sound and pressure level can separate, but also open quotient tends to not change a whole lot, or have to change a whole lot between different vowels. This is an attempt to correlate open quotient and vocal intensity. So this more answers the question about, can you be loud on an open quotient? correlation coefficient. Vocal intensity. So I guess that's a breakdown. This table to the left is a breakdown of whether or not different vowels affect intensities in quotients. That's a little bit out of the scope, so I'm going to slide down a little bit more. I don't think it's going to be quite as helpful. Yeah, like mileage varies, as you saw in that paragraph to the right. Hopefully, you can rewind this video in the future and see that the vowel correlation varies for different kinds of Facher. Honestly, I wish they didn't divide it up by Facher. Okay, so vocal intensity as a function of open quotient. So vocal intensity, I know, is partially including sound pressure level. I think it might include some harmonic information. Probably should have read that better before I got drunk, but it is what it is. With these, why is it just the baritones? You can see sound pressure level as it decreases, open quotient tends to increase. So there is some correlation, but there's also ones for which it's not correlated. So as you can see here, baritone number 4 did not have much correlation between sound pressure level, which is basically loudness, and quotient, which is in this axis. Hopefully y'all can see as the and pressure increase. There wasn't like a definitive, oh, you have to increase. Like, it happens. It's a thing that happens. But, yeah. And as you can also see, higher voice types, like the tenor and the countertenor, well, especially the tenor, especially this damn tenor, tend to have a higher open quotient than their baritone counterparts. And for them, they have like the inverse kind of correlation of SPL, which is the intensity, to the open quotient down here. Well, SPL as a measure of basically sound pressure, which is like the air pressure that's pushing on your vocal cords, which more correlates, as we can see, to the actual loudness than open quotient itself. Okay, scroll down a little more. Let's see if there's any questions while you do that. Nope. 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 Nope.
That's a good section, open quotient and fundamental frequency.
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's get into that stuff. The other thing I hate about this is that, like, the article is, like, split on 2 sides. That's annoying. So there is a correlation between open quotient and fundamental, so the pitch that you're hitting. So that's why I use pitch as a trigger for it, because it's like a built-in trigger. But, however, this correlation seems to depend on the laryngeal mechanism, as it is not found in the parts of the glissando sung in mechanism 1. So they're trying to characterize not only in terms of pitch, but in terms of mechanism. So that means as you go higher in M1, at first when you go higher in M1, you tend to lighten up. You hit the operatic head voice, where like I'm in my light modal voice. And that would be basically like, I popped at the end to show you that's M1 because it can change to M2. That is a lighter sound that people tend to get as they go up naturally, but if you hold on to the closed quotient, so someone was asking like, oh, does that mean let go of it? Like, yes, it can mean, is that what they mean when they let go of your voice as it goes higher? And yes, that's part of what it means when they say let go of your voice as it goes higher. Let that open quotient natural increase happen. But for some people, they don't get that. Or for some people, like when they go into, or for most people, when they go into belting, you're going to get a spike probably, or not spike, but a decrease, a sharp decrease in open quotient as your vocal cords come together more to belt. Okay, let's see if there's any good stuff on the strong dependency on laryngeal mechanisms. So again, confirming the open quotient values are lower in mechanism 1 than in mechanism 2. Okay, so mixed voice is mentioned real quick in the tenor. I think tenors are probably some of the best all-around Fach, like even more so than like an alto or whatever. Tenors are some of the best Fach in classical. I'm sorry about it, but they're showing that basically keeping a higher open quotient in mechanism 1 allows the creation of this mixed aesthetic. There's another article that goes over that further, but we're not reading that for y'all because y'all don't want to learn. Y'all want to ask questions now. This sentence is really helpful right here. So if you're trying to have your M1 sound like your M2, and your M2 sound like your M1, part of it is that you need to have an M1 that can be imitated by M2. If your M1 is super dense like this, it's hard to have that equivalent sound in M2. But if it's super light like this can be emulated more in M2. I'm switching to M2 and emulating what I was doing before. And you can emulate that sound more. So, but with unusually high values of open quotient, so as to mimic the voice quality of mechanism 2. So that tenor's got the game figured out. So if you have a means of looking at the open quotient of your voice, and we'll talk more about what it feels like in just general questions later on. If people ask questions about these things, you can learn. If you want to know how to apply these things, ask as each thing comes up. Like, how do I actually put this into practice? I know I need an higher open quotient in my M1 in order to contextualize my M2 as being like mixed. But how do I actually put that into play? Like, ask me those questions and you shall receive. This is something I struggle with youth. This is another juicy thing that I want to point out for another one of my mods. There is a degree of overlap between the open quotient ranges corresponding to laryngeal mechanisms M1 and M2. So while M1 tends to be more closed off and have a lower open quotient, and M2 tends to be have a higher open quotient. Ooh, this liquor is quicker. You get enough overlap between the two that you can really converge the qualities. So how we put that into practice, what that practically affects is that if you just look at quotient and feeling the vocal cords alone, that can't be necessarily your telltale sign of this is definitely M1 or definitely M2. That's why I use the passaggio, the switch between M1 and M2, that noise that you get, that's why I use that as the telltale, not just sound quality, as Nick can heavily attest to.
Yes.
We love an open quotient queen.
That quotient is...
Okay, let's see if there's anything else juicy here. And let's see if there's any questions. Okay, I feel like belting increases your OQ. That's interesting. There is nothing. Oh, dang, that's a lot of people here. Ask questions and direct people to the YouTube if they want to see the actual article that I'm reading as I'm reading it. But does belting increase OQ? It really shouldn't inherently. Like if you just have the same note and or neighboring notes and you're going from just regular M1 to belting, open quotient should theoretically decrease. But that's interesting and worth exploring more. There are definitely belts and people and belters that have differing results with OQ. Some people have a higher OQ when they belt Nick, and some people have a higher CQ when they belt me. So I definitely advise getting used to both of those kinds of belting. Like a belting with a higher OQ might be something like this, or sorry, that was awful. This, and a higher CQ, a high or lower OQ would be like this. So getting used to both styles is a very helpful thing to do. Make sure you do that. And thank you so much to Krampus for recording this audio. Just want to stop believing. And they're talking about smoothing. So smoothing, I think, which in this context means the smoothing of a switch to mechanisms. Some of that is done by muting the break itself. Because even if I do what I talk about, you can still hear the break. And what they're talking about right here is like getting those open quotient values to be more equated across M1 and M2. It makes a less drastic difference. If you want a smooth, seamless sounding voice, you want to work on having a high enough OQ in your M1 that you can go from M1 to M2 without as much of a noticeable difference. The belt thing, I guess, was a good question and a timely question. So let me take a full shot. Watch this shit go. Thank you, Krampus, for recording and helping me survive this dark, cold night. Well, woo! Wrong hole. Does it count if my lungs get drunk? Okay. So, right here, some really good ranges. So you have a range of 3 to 8, which basically means like 30% of the time your vocal cords are open, 80% of the time your vocal cords are open. And slow it down in mechanism 1, and from 0.5 to 0.95, which makes a good case for, Nick, you want to talk about more of the theory of the vocal cords not touching at all in M1 and possibly in M3 and all that good stuff?
I don't know about M1. I feel like they should touch.
Yeah, in 0.95. Did I say M1? I meant M2. M2 and M3.
Yeah, there are some people who have postulated that in certain subsets of M2, that the open quotient is so high that like the closed quotient is almost unnoticeable or just not there at all. So it's interesting. I mean, I don't know enough about it to speak like I'm an authority on the subject.
Yeah. So I think this actually makes a good case for that in certain realms of M2, the vocal cords might not touch at all. Or not at all, because it's still 0.95, which means like you would have an OQ of who in the whomst in these comments can do the math. If you have an OQ of 0.95, what would be the CQ? I'll wait. Mia. Smart math people not allowed. Yeah, no, yeah, y'all can hear me coming through. Y'all can hear Nick coming through my audio. Please, if you don't get what that means, like, ask what all this means. Obligate falsetto. Yes! Yes, using my words, Corey. So, yeah, obligate falsetto is something I talk about where people just have problems adducting their vocal cords. So if you have this incredibly high open quotient in M2, that is the kind of thing that a lot of people experience as obligate falsetto. Like when they go into M2, it flips into these like really thin kind of breathy configurations that are more thin than breathy. So it's like it's super duper thin. So people can't get their open quotient above a certain reach, then they might experience that. A lot of this is just statistical stuff. I read through this before, but it's mostly statistical stuff. So we'll scroll through that. And we're getting to the end of this article, and we'll go over the other article probably really quickly. I'll just go over the abstract and go over hopefully the stuff at the end. Yeah, I guess that's it. Any overall questions on this article, on that last article before we dive into this next one? Going once. Going twice. If y'all watching the YouTube, you like read through the articles too on the YouTube. Make sure I'm not just lying. Oh, if you were right, oh yeah, I said you were right. I want other people to try to guess, but yeah, you were right. It's a close quotient 0.5, which is like greater than 1, but still like low as fuck. So you can't necessarily say like what percent of the time, or what actual time span the vocal cords spend together. You can only say whether or not they like are together.
I mean, I guess if you had like the pitch that they were making, you could make an approximation.
Yeah.
Hold on, let's see. If you go at A440, because that's our favorite.
No!
Yeah, that's our favorite. The 440 times.
Which A is that even? Is that A4 or A5? Is that A4?
That's A4.
A440 is A4?
Yeah.
Well, concert tuning, A4. Damn, this vodka. Strong. Okay, what was A4? Okay. No questions. So let me do a quick review of this article. Before we dive into it, I'm just going to tell you what to expect in this article. Damn, I am messed up on this vodka.
Wait, never mind. I'm just kidding.
Okay. So, basically, this article is to answer all the questions that are about how do I actually do this? How do I control the quotient? I thought of going over this first, but I also wanted people to understand the importance and relevance of the quotient and to want to try to control it. So, and Nick had it pulled up first, so that's why I ended up just going with that one. But this is more the article where we'll be focusing on like how do I actually control this? What things actually control this? Because this article is basically about the thrusty that was stolen from somebody's grave and used for the betterment of all thrusty kind. They even put some like, they blood transfused this thrusty to get it going for this study. Damn, I wish I had that clout. I wish I could like exhume a damn throat from a dead person and do that. So the reason why for doing that is they can do electrode measurements. They can basically put electrodes against different muscle groups and see how it affects the open quotient and closed quotient. You need like a human with very precise training that I don't think even the likes of me has to actually isolate a muscle group, trying to see what that muscle group does to the open quotient. Within 2 hours of cardiac death, holy damn! I wonder what they like agreed to before, like if they agreed to this shit or whatever. It's like, yeah, I want people to hear my voice after I die.
This is straight necromancy.
Right. I'm excited for this shit. Good thing I picked it. Okay, so let's scroll down and get into it. Take me to this abstract. Oh my god. Y'all have so many questions later about open quotient. I would have been like, this article answer this question. If any of these articles answer an open or closed quotient question that arises, yes, even in the trans voice channel, I will ignore it. Okay. The compendium of human I'm trying to look for stuff that differs for what from what I have said. Okay. So, The thyroarytenoid, or TA muscle, you often see this referenced. The TA muscle is the chesty muscle, right? Right, Nick? That's the one that's associated with M1, sorry.
Associated, yeah, it's the vocalis portion.
Yes.
The thyroarytenoid.
Okay. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that and put that into context in terms of like the TA muscle is used for this, and like TA dominant can refer to belting, but like break that down. Why? Like we always have a little bit of CT. No, that give us the T on that shit.
We actually always have a lot of it of CT compared to our retinoid engagement. Research has shown that after approximately the 4 lowest semitones of a person's range, they are always in a quote-unquote CT dominant engagement.
Mm-hmm. Accurate AF. So yeah, take this with some grain of salt. So what this means, what Nick just said means, is that some people, especially in like the vocal professional field, will talk about like something being TA dominant, but it's in terms of relative levels of engagement. There's definitely like a difference that TA makes, but there is so much CT happening at all times that it's not worth talking about
Dominance.
Yeah, dominance in that way. That's like, this is a CT dominant thing and a TA dominant, if you ever hear anybody using that. What this kind of leads and opens the gateways of hell to allow is people talking about, well, we're max because like a CT is the M2 muscle or head voice muscle, and TA is the M1 or chest voice muscle. But this actually kind of debunks that at the same time, because there is a degree of CT and TA in both mechanisms. So these muscles are constantly mixed, which does not necessarily mean the mechanisms are mixed, because mechanisms are the outcome. And that's what these papers are going to look at, the outcome of how the vocal cords act when they are acted upon by these different muscles. So TA, as this mentioned, like somewhere in the abstract you'll see bulk and tension of the vocal fold body. So TA tends to make more vocal fold body active, which means like a meteor sound. That's why belt is a meteor sound, because you literally have more meat jiggling in M2 in M1 than you do in M2. So it's going to definitely be a meteor sound. So this also talks about the limits of a study like this. So you can look at what every muscle does to the open quotient, which means like if you can find a drill that activates a certain muscle, you can sort of tell what relationship it'll have to your quotient. But there's some limits to this, because it's like a necromancy thrusy. So you still have to feed it blood, and the tissue isn't going to act the exact same way. So the muscles will act hopefully somewhat similarly, but the tissue of the vocal cords doesn't not necessarily move in the exact same way as living tissue, because it's no longer getting some sweet, sweet blood. Okay, scroll down. Let's get into it. I had to admit jiggling. Thank you, Rye. Or Mesos Bueno. Okay, these methods aren't super important unless somebody wants to know about the methods. Y'all don't want to know about nothing. So, scroll down. This is just basically standard. Ex vivo means like we stole it from a grave. The IRB determined this was exam. IRB is basically like the fucking district court for doing research. Like, you have to do all this fucking paperwork and bureaucracy and bullshit to get a fucking study passed that it's like prohibitive to a lot of different kinds of studies, because like, is this ethical? And it's like, you are using someone's voice after they are dead, and they didn't have to even go through the IRB bureaucracy process. I am so hurt. Okay, let's keep scrolling down because this is just preservation methods.
Which says white privilege.
This is white privilege at its peak. Peak white privilege is making the dead sing without having to get approval.
How much do you want me to keep scrolling?
I'm trying to like really when go through this. Okay. Let's see. Adductor muscle groups. They're talking about the different adductors. Also, fun fact, helpful knowledge. Most of the muscles in your vocal tract are adductors, which means they compress things and they squeeze things. We are built to activate our voices by squeezing things, so don't let people try to tell you that you can't phonate in a certain way because it's like it's squeezed, it's compressed, because we have so many different muscles fine-tuning that as opposed to like things that pull our vocal cords apart. So we're built to do this. The results that are talked about in this first paragraph are sort of what you would expect. That cricothyroid, CT, which is also, believe it or not, the muscles for CT and TA are CT, which is often associated with M2, and TA, which is also usually associated with M1, is like they both close the thrusty off. So CT tends to close off less and TA tends to close off more, but no matter what kind of closing muscle you are activating, the glottis tends to stay closed longer. So all of these muscles, so that basically tells you that like muscle activation tends to close the glottis longer. So if you're feeling like a higher effort level, that is probably the way to go about decreasing your open quotient. Damn, this English is something. Okay, scroll down a little bit. So figure 4 I am very excited for, but this article has a very weird layout. Okay, stop there for a second. Okay, now you can see, so volts, like we all know like a whatever volt battery or whatever, it's the higher voltage that they put in, or the lower voltage that they put in, the higher the OQ is. So basically the more they made this thrusty dance, the more they performed a phoenix down on this damn exhumed throat box, they got a higher closed quotient, which means a lower open quotient. So when they put 8 volts, the open quotient was low as hell. But there is a point at which, like when you look at 10 volts, that is the same as the 8 volt measurement, which means like after a certain level of exertion, which here is like 8 volts, that muscle group can no longer decrease OQ by inducing that tension and bringing the vocal cords together. So if you really want a super high closed quotient, that's going to involve the coordination of multiple muscles. So when you have a very super high closed quotient, that's what you want. Be prepared for a certain level of basically strain because you have to use more than one muscle to do this. Let's see if anybody's asking a question. No questions? Of course not. Okay. Let's see if this says anything that y'all trying to see. So this study basically, this is just outlining that the general, looking at increasing the activity of any adductor. So that means whether or not you are like just pressing the vocal folds together with a kind of looser high closed quotient, which is like so it's pretty relaxed, but it has a high close quotient. It has that density. Or you can also have a more strained high close quotient, low open quotient. So like, that strain that you hear also contributes to the reduction of the open quotient. But basically, this outlines that there's more than one way to skin this cat. So this is a lot of like science of how we accommodated our Native American burial ground thrussy. So the conclusion. Let's work through this conclusion. There's an open quotient. So there are adductors. Hopefully I didn't mix up the words. Adductor. Adductor means you bring them together. An abductor means you pull them apart. So hopefully I used the right words. But any adductor of the vocal cords will increase the close quotient. So basically pushing your vocal folds together will invariably increase the close quotient, decrease the close quotient. I can do this, I believe in me. Increasing the adduction will also decrease the close quotient, open quotient. Decrease the open quotient. I did it. So there's basically multiple ways to skin a cat. You can use so many different muscles to achieve this higher open and close quotient. And CT and TA muscles, which are basically the muscles that bring the vocal folds together in different mechanisms and usually act somewhat at all times in both mechanisms. You can lean harder into the muscles that stabilize any given mechanism to get a lower close quotient, which means tighter vocal cords together, a heavier, denser sound. So what I guess this means in practice is that the CT, stimulating that, can increase the close quotient and decrease the open quotient the same way that chesty activity can. So that explains a lot of why people have to relearn. You need to relearn how to close that thrusy and activate the CT a little bit more during M2. So just because you can get a very tight M1 doesn't mean that you have a tight and right go all night kind of thrusy in M2 because you're using different muscle groups to achieve this open and close quotient. So that explains the kind of relearning of it, and that you can't just use, well, I'm closed in this mechanism, so I'll be closed in that mechanism. You're going to have to relearn the muscles that are more going to act to close something. You can lean a bit more into the TA to close during M1, but you can't do that quite as much during M2, and the CT is a muscle that's worth learning to use on its own. So in other words, learn how M2 operates and feels, and learn how to close it without looking for it to feel exactly like the way closing, getting this like type of sound in M2 feels like when I get the type of sound in M1. So it's sort of like skinning the cat two different ways. I wish they would have talked a little bit more about the different muscle bodies that they electroded, but y'all are getting what you pay for and y'all ain't paid. So questions, general questions. This I think potentially completes the curation. Scroll down, see if there's anything more. Oh, these are all the figures. Really, they waited till now to display the figures. That's chymography. If y'all want to know what chymography is like, okay, we'll probably go through some of these images but only people ask about them. Because I'm feeling depressed about this crappy audio, so I'm about to like quit this damn stream. Because people don't have no damn questions. So I know this stuff would be hard for me to learn if I just skipped over a damn chimography. Nobody wants to know what a chimography is. Pop quiz. What's a chimography? What's chimographic imaging? Y'all know. Y'all don't have questions.
If you killed it a GIF and you laid it out, this is what a GIF would be.
If you killed a what? And like what?
A GIF. A GIF.
Yeah, that's not the yeah, I could see chimography being described like that. That's actually a decent description. If you killed a GIF and oh my god. Okay, so Valerie, I'm assuming is the only one that wants to know what chimography is. Then I'll just DM Valerie what a chimography is, unless y'all want to know too. Anybody else want to know what a chimography is? Yep, that's exactly 10 points to Rye. I don't know why you are doing that. I saw the picture, but does anybody want to guess at what one is? Chimos. If we're wrapping the chimos. All the chimos! No. Okay, that's all. I am interested in seeing your guess. You want to guess what it is? Booty hole. It's a big booty hole. Keisha. Not Keisha. So now everyone knows what a chimograph is. So maybe somebody should ask what a chimograph is. Yeah! See what we did? See what we did? We asked a question, and now we're getting an answer. Look at that! Look at that! Just in time for this broadcast to be over, we are getting questions. Huh?
So it feels like I'm back in public school.
Okay, so scroll back up. That data is juicy, but scroll back up to any given chimograph. Like, yeah, so the chimograph is in focus. So this right here is a chimograph. So what a chimograph is it looks at one point on the vocal folds closing. You don't have to show this, because I'll show this, unless you really want to show this. But vocal cords, not chords. Chimograph. See if somebody has a good image. Do we have like a line? Damn it! Do we have a damn thing that will show you? Okay, there. No. There's not like one image that will give you both. Okay, this demonstrates what a chimograph is pretty well. So you look at this one line of the space across the vocal chords, and they will come together and come apart if you're phonating. So as they come together and come apart, you can look at how just these two parts of the vocal folds come together and push apart over time. So this line is selected, and then over time, you're looking at, okay, here, this line is open. But then at this time point, the vocal cords, part of the vocal cords at this line is closed. What this does, which is very,
Oh, I was going to say, it looks like somebody took a panoramic picture of something that's moving, except they didn't pan. They just kept it in the same spot.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, because it's a movoramic picture, not a panoramic. So it's not looking at different scenery, it's looking at different motions of one thing at various time points. Damn. I get the drunk hiccups and everything. Y'all could literally have had me dead. I know y'all want me dead because you're killing me on the inside with this lack of questions. But chymography is great because the way the vocal cords will approximate and push apart at different parts of the vocal cord will look different whether or not they're an M1 and M2. So this is what, or whatever glottal configuration you want to think about. So you can look at the sort of behavior of opening and closing, but how it happens in different mechanisms. And you can look at if you're opening and closing as much of the vocal cords. So chymography is great because not only looks at like the opening and closing, it looks at where the opening and closing is happening. See, look at that. Y'all didn't know a thing. And you asked a question. Yes, so it grasps the space in your thrusy, but at a certain given intersection of your thrusy. So this chymograph gives us pretty much what we should expect. Remember the data from before, we talked about the higher the voltage, the more lightning magic that you pour into this ancient voice of the elders, the more you get these closed spaces, the more frequent they are at the very least, and the less you get these open readings. So when you see this black space, that means they're open. At this lower voltage, at 2 volts, we get mostly open. However, as we increase the voltage, we get less open, more closed. But then as we get to the 8 volts and 10 volts, you can see they're pretty much the same. Look at and that's what the article said. So see, science works, y'all. The opening here is equivalent in duration because look, this axis is time. So the longer this opening is, the longer the opening time is. And again, that emphasizes why the distinction of open quotient not being how wide they are, but how much time. Because at any time, see, look, these can close. But as they are more open, sorry, I circled the wrong thing. As they are more open or spending more time closed, you get the higher close quotient. So at any one given time, quotient won't tell us where these vocal cords will be. It's more of an overall reading of how often you get these open spaces, how often the space in your vocal cord that we're looking at opens up, which it might not do that, might not be open enough to let through air that you can hear. It's open enough to impact the sound quality, but not to necessarily induce breathiness. So another debunking of open quotient is breathiness confirmed. The cunt is very firm. Slide down.
Hey, I have to go, so I'm just gonna leave it on this while you finish it.
Okay, I think that is probably enough of me actually reading the article. For now, and I will open it up to questions for about a minute. So if you have general questions about how to apply this, if you're thinking of ways in which you can apply this thing, now is definitely the time to ask. Any general questions? People are like, how is this useful for my actual voice? I don't know. But nobody has any questions, so everybody knows exactly how to apply it to their voice, right? Somebody asked literally the exact question. I talked about all the different ways that can be useful. Beat Mania. Oh my god, that's like a Step Mania, Beat Mania reference. You have no idea. So everybody here. Okay, do people want more simplifications? Because that's something you could have asked for at the beginning of this entire presentation. Well, if you need something and you're here, ask for it. What thing do you want explained in caveman-like terminology? Okay. A real question. Yeah, because like I am so sure. Okay, let me quiz y'all. Let's see if y'all really understand this quotient. Okay, what is OQ in practical application? Is this leading into an actual question? Well, if this language is fancy, I think these concepts are important, but if this language is fancy and not making sense to y'all, that's a question you should ask during the fancy language. Like, make this language less fancy. Can you repeat that part but explain this thing? So I don't know what level y'all are at, and as y'all can see from the trans voice comments that were popping off and all that drama from just a second ago, that people don't like things being explained below their level. So, then ask what the vocab means. What vocab do you want to know the meaning of? So I did it at kind of like a moderate level. I talked about M1, but I also use like terms like head voice and chest voice. If you don't know what those mean, that's a time to ask what those mean. Yeah, so we talked about the different muscles. So you have some anatomy there. We talked about muscles like the cricothyroid and thyroaretinoid and the vocalis muscle, but nobody really had any question about like where those are and where those are at. So I didn't answer a question because I can't answer a question that doesn't exist. So those are the main adductors that were looked at. The cricothyroid and the thyroaretinoid were the two main adductors I think looked at in that study. Also, I gotta ask questions before we get in and we get lost. Now I don't know where you got lost. So y'all had a chance to get me shit, fucked up, and not be confused like this. So as we saw in that graph, which I can't display right now because that was during the video, but if you scroll back in the video, the more voltage you apply to the CT and TA muscles, you get a lower OQ and a higher CQ. So it's two different controls of what are the CT and TA muscles. Great question. The CT and TA muscles are adductors of the vocal cords. They bring the vocal cords closer together, but sort of in different patterns and ways. And approximately, oh my God. Yes, Mesosobredo. Those will bring, like, so CT muscles tend to bring things together the way they are brought together during M2. So like this. So if I get things tighter in the M2, I'm more leaning into the CT muscles to bring things together. So versus if I'm in M1, I'm going to tend to bring things together with the TA muscles as well. The TA will tend to have more activity. So in M1, which includes chest, voice, and belt, I'm going to use those muscles to bring things together. So like, and I can use the TA a little bit more. in those configurations to bring the vocal cords closer together. So yeah, so that explains, what does that explain in practicality? That explains in practicality why you have like baritons and basses with like very higher close quotient masculine voices, but then when they flip into M2, the voices are thinner and less adducted. You think, oh, if you can have a higher close quotient or lower open quotient where you're not just like thin in your speaking voice, you should be able to do that in your singing voice, right? Or not singing voice, but like singing M2. When you go to sing M2, you should be able to have more density, right? Wrong, because it's different muscles that control those things. No, nobody knows. That's the secret, though. Nobody knows what I'm saying because nobody wants to ask questions. So ask a question. Yes, so laryngeal tilt most corresponds, and that was a good question, Lob. Let me drink to that question. I think I'm gonna die, so I'm only gonna pour like a half a shot, because I think this glass seems like a double anyway, so I'm gonna pour half a shot with this thing. Let me switch to the Hangouts call. Yeah, I know there's a lot, which is why you gotta ask questions. I keep pausing for questions, but nobody's asking them. This is a demonstration of why to ask questions. Let me drink to nobody asking questions until it's too late. Oh my God, I cannot get that down the right hole. So, laryngeal tilt is most correlated with the tension in the vocal folds, which most corresponds with pitch. So think about like tuning your guitar. No, everyone is under the curve because no one is asking questions. So ask questions, you're helping everyone out. I'm going to answer this question and I'm going to turn off the streams. Krampus can feel free to record. If you are watching this on YouTube, ask questions. Come to the future streams. Make sure you get all this. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop the streams. Actually, no, I'm not stopping the streams yet, because, sorry, I'm drunk. But I'm not stopping the streams yet, because I still got to answer, I need a little bit more specific than that, Zeddy, but I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, I appreciate you keeping up with the terminology. I'll answer those questions in a second because I can help you with that because those are like terminologies I use in this video and stuff. So Lob asked about laryngeal tilt and open and close quotient. So as you see with pitch, there are certain tendencies in open quotient to go higher as you go higher until you get to like a block. As you get strained in your range, then yeah, you'll tend to increase close quotient. So in general, as we talked about, open quotient tends to increase as you go higher, and the tilt putting tension on your vocal cords to make them higher. So those of you who play guitar, think of like tuning a guitar string tighter. I'm going to put on video so I can make a video metaphor. If I'm stretching out, like think of this as tilting. So if I'm stretching out, if I'm tilting my larynx to stretch out my vocal cords, this is tilting. And imagine I'm pulling on something. If I'm tilting, then that will stretch my vocal cords more, making them tighter, making them more likely to vibrate faster, but also increasing the open quotient because they're tilted and stretched and tight, so they don't want to spread out. Like when we're talking about this, so if your vocal cords are nice and loose, they're going to shake into each other more. But if they're super tight and they're only vibrating a little bit, they're not going to shake into each other the same way they would if Like they're nice and loose. So they're going to shake into each other more. And when they shake into each other more at these lower pitches where they're more loose, that's going to increase the close quotient. So part of learning to have an increased close quotient is relaxing to allow the vocal cords to elongate even at higher pitches, which will allow them to vibrate into each other. Some people can also, there's a certain amount of relaxation to increasing your close quotient. At the same time, however, you have forces of tension on your vocal folds that can increase close quotient, like the adductor muscles that we talked about. So if you use those adductor muscles and you have lesser laryngeal tilt because you're at a lower pitch, you can increase your close quotient more, and decrease your open quotient more. So what this pans out to practically is that at a lower note with tension of certain muscles, yet relaxation of the tilting muscles, you can get a higher close quotient. So if I let my vocal cords elongate, but I also press them into each other, that can increase the close quotient. So that sounds like practically is like, say I'm hitting a lower note and I relax into this lower note, I'm going to get a heavier, higher close quotient voice. If I also strain while doing this relaxation, the close quotient can increase more by forcing my vocal folds together. Yes, okay. So that is the last question I'm answering on these live streams. If you want to catch more of these questions, make sure you get on my Discord server where I will continue to answer questions. Ask questions. I'm drunk.